The late afternoon sun dipped low over the neat rows of homes in Maypridge, casting a soft golden haze, trimmed hedges, and identical mailboxes. The neighborhood had the stillness of a place designed to be perfect. Mandated perfection. Enforced with quiet smiles and sharp letters slipped into mail slots. To most it was a postcard. To those who lived under its rules it could feel like a cage. 17-year-old Maya was used to being watched. She knew when curtains twitched as she wheeled past, when eyes lingered longer than they should. Some pitied her. Some ignored her. Some, like HO president, turned her into a problem to be solved. But on this warm October evening, Maya wasn't thinking about any of that. She had her earbuds in, music pulsing, something upbeat, something that made her feel lighter than her body sometimes allowed. Her wheelchair rolled smoothly over the sidewalk cracks, her hands practiced and strong against the wheels. She carried a canvas tote clipped to the back of her chair, a library book inside she was proud to have finished early. For once, she felt like she belonged to the rhythm of the neighborhood. The squeak of her wheels blending with the hollow bounce of a basketball from 2 houses down, the distant bark of a dog, the rustle of wind through maple leaves. Across the street, Karen Doyle pulled her silver SUV into her driveway with the confidence of someone who believed the entire block bent to her schedule. The HO president, always brisk, always watchful, stepped out and adjusted her sunglasses even though the sun was nearly gone. Her lips tightened when she noticed the girl on the sidewalk. Maya again. Karen muttered under her breath something about fools and common property. She had complained before that the path behind the houses wasn't meant for wheelchairs, that the HOA guidelines made it clear. Neighbors rolled their eyes, ignored her warnings, but Karen prided herself on being the one who enforced what others would not. Tonight, though, something was different. Karen's hand brushed against the pistol at her side. She had a concealed carry license, often bragged about it at block parties, and she told herself it was for safety. Yet here, in this quiet cul-de-sac where the biggest crime in memory was a stolen garden gnome, the weapon was more ornament than necessity. Still, she carried it like a badge of authority. She saw Maya heading toward a path that cut between 2 rows of houses. Karen's jaw tightened. Not again. Hey, she shouted, striding across the manicured lawn. Her heels sank slightly into the grass, but she kept her voice loud, sharp. Hey, you can't go down there. The music cocooned her, safe and oblivious. She hummed under her breath, her hands pushing the wheels forward, heading for the path where the sunset painted the pavement gold. Karen's pulse quickened, anger rushed hot through her veins. How many times had she told that family? How many times had she reminded the mother that rules existed for a reason? And here was the daughter, ignoring her again like the rules didn't apply. Said stop. The pistol was cool and heavy in her grip. The pistol was cool and heavy in her grip. She pulled it free without thought, the motion practiced. For a moment, the weight of it felt reassuring. She aimed. Not down, not to the slow-moving figure just a dozen yards ahead. Maya, a voice cried from a porch down the street, but Maya didn't hear. The first shot cracked through the evening air, sharp and merciless. Birds exploded from the trees, scattering into the sky. The basketball clattered onto the pavement, forgotten. Neighbors gasped, screamed, hands flying to mouths. Maya's body jolted as if yanked by invisible strings. Her chair wobbled violently, one wheel jerking sideways. She clutched at her chest, confusion breaking across her face before pain carved deeper lines. Then came the second shot. Her chair spun a half circle, momentum carrying her into the edge of the grass, where she tipped sideways, hitting the ground with a thud that silenced the block. Her earbuds popped free, dangling lifelessly against her hoodie. The world seemed to pause, suspended between disbelief and horror. Karen stood frozen, gun still raised. Her breath came fast, ragged, as though she had moved more than a few feet. The pistol trembled in her hands. For a long, terrifying second, her eyes stayed locked on the fallen figure, as if she wasn't entirely sure what she'd done. Then the shouts started. Oh my God, a neighbor ran from his driveway, his phone already in $1. Somebody call. A woman screamed Maya's name over and over. A boy clutched the basketball to his chest, rocking on his heels, unable to look away from the blood spreading across the girl's back. Karen's lips moved, her voice cracking like brittle glass. I didn't see her. She stammered. I didn't see her. Her words tumbled over themselves, desperate, frantic. She repeated them like a chant, as though saying them enough times might undo what had just happened. I didn't see her. I didn't see her. But everyone else had. They had seen the way she shouted, the way her hand reached for the gun too quickly, the way she raised it steady at a teenage girl who had no chance to defend herself. They had seen the flash, the recoil, the fall. A man knelt by Maya, pressing his hands against her wound, his palms slick with red. Stay with us. His voice cracked, his eyes wide with fear. Maya's breaths came shallow, each one a fragile struggle. Her lips parted as if to say something, but only a faint whimper escaped, the gun slipping slightly in her grip before she tightened her hold. Her face was pale, her hands shaking violently now. "It was an accident," she whispered. "She shouldn't have been there. She shouldn't." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Neighbors closed in, some shouting at her to drop the gun, others screaming for help, for an ambulance, for justice. And in the middle of it all, under the fading glow of the sunset, Maya lay motionless, her blood soaking into the perfect green grass of the neighborhood that had never wanted her. The perfection of Maple Ridge had finally cracked, and nothing would ever look clean again. The courtroom smelled faintly of old wood polish and coffee gone cold, a mix that clung to the air the way grief clung to Maya's mother. She sat in the front row, her posture rigid, her hands laced tightly together as if holding them apart would cause her to unravel. The gallery behind her was packed. Neighbors from Maple Ridge, reporters with sharp pens and sharper stares, and strangers drawn in by the story that had already begun making national headlines. At the defense table, Karen Dahl sat pale and shrunken, a stark contrast to the woman who once strutted through block parties with a clipboard and an air of authority. Her hair, always immaculately styled, hung limp at her shoulders. A tissue lay crumpled in her palm, damp from use. She had practiced contrition in front of the mirror for weeks, but now, under the unforgiving eyes of 12 jurors, it came across as hollow. The bailiff announced. The judge, a solemn man with a lined face that had seen its share of human wreckage, took his seat. The trial had already stretched into its second week, but this day carried weight. The prosecution was closing, and everyone knew it. The jury leaned forward, pens poised above yellow legal pads. They weren't just taking notes anymore. They were hunting for truth in fragments. The prosecutor, a tall man with a booming voice, rose with deliberate slowness. He looked at the jury, then at Karen, then finally at the photograph projected onto the screen beside him. The image struck like a hammer Maya's wheelchair, empty, tilted on its side in the grass where she had fallen. The dark stain still visible on the fabric seat. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice firm, steady. This is what neglect looks like. This is what happens when arrogance masquerades as authority. This is what happens when someone believes rules matter more than human life." Karen shifted uncomfortably, her attorney whispering something in her ear. She nodded, but her eyes darted toward the jury, searching for any sign of sympathy. "She told you she didn't see Maya," the prosecutor continued, walking toward the jurors now, one slow step at a time. "That's her defense, that she didn't see a 17-year-old girl, her neighbor. A girl she had spoken to, written about in her HOA complaints, mentioned in meetings. A girl she had seen hundreds of times. And yet she expects you to believe that on that evening, with the sun still high enough to cast clear shadows, with neighbors outside and children playing in driveways, she somehow failed to notice her." He paused, let the silence sitch, let the jurors sit in it. "She didn't fail to see. She failed to care." A murmur rippled through the gallery, hushed quickly by the bailiff's sharp glance. At the front row, Maya's mother pressed her lips together, her eyes burning but unyielding. She wanted to stand, to scream, to tell the court how many times Karen had harassed her daughter for simply existing where she wasn't supposed to. But this was not her place to speak. She had already given her testimony, her voice breaking as she described finding Maya in the hospital, tubes and wires where Lauder should have been. Now she could only wait. The prosecutor lifted another photo onto the screen. This one froze the moment after the shot Karen with her gun raised, captured in a neighbor's phone camera. Her posture rigid, her mouth open as if caught mid-justification. "She claims it was an accident," he said, his tone sharper now. "But accidents don't look like this. Accidents don't involve pulling a gun from its holster, aiming it, and firing not once but twice. This was a decision." Karen's attorney stood abruptly, objecting, his voice pitched, almost frantic. "Speculation. He's assigning motive where there is none." The judge raised a hand. "Overruled." The jury, the prosecutor nodded, satisfied, then turned back to the jury. His voice softened now, deliberate, intimate. "Think about Maya, 17 years old, a daughter, a student, a girl who loved books, who loved the simple freedom of rolling down her street with music in her ears. She was no threat. She broke no law. She lived." He glanced at Karen then, his expression hardening. "Until the defendant decided her life was an inconvenience." Karen's breath caught audibly. She shook her head, whispering, "I didn't see her," as if clinging to the words could keep them true. The prosecutor stepped back, gesturing to the empty wheelchair still lingering on the screen. "This isn't about rules. This isn't about HO guidelines. This is about responsibility. This is about a woman who held in her hands the power to kill, and chose to use it against a child who could not defend herself." He returned to his table, his closing words hanging in the air like smoke. "Hold her accountable. Give Maya justice. The room went still. Karen's attorney rose, smoothing his tie with hands that betrayed a tremor. He approached the jury with practiced humility, trying to undo the damage. My client is not a monster, he began, his tone softer. Pleading, she is a woman who made a mistake. A tragic mistake, yes, but not one born of malice. He paced slowly, careful not to push too hard. You've heard the testimony. You know how quickly things escalated. She called out. She thought she saw a threat. She reacted. A juror raised an eyebrow, scribbling something on her pad. The attorney pressed on. She has no history of violence. She has no desire to hurt anyone. She has lived in that neighborhood for over a decade without incident. And now, because of one terrible misjudgment, she faces the possibility of losing her entire future. He stopped in front of the jury, lowering his voice. I ask you, is that justice? Or is it vengeance? He let the question hang, then nodded solemnly and returned to his seat. The judge gave final instructions. The jury filed out, their faces unreadable. The gallery buzzed with whispers until the gavel struck. Maya's mother bowed her head, lips moving in silent prayer. Karen gripped her tissue so tightly in her fist. Hours later, when the jury returned, the room fell silent again. The foreperson stood, paper in hand. Weigh, the jury, find the defendant Karen Doyle. A pause, a collective intake of breath. Guilty of second-degree murder. The words landed like stones in water, rippling through every corner of the courtroom. Maya's mother exhaled a sob that seemed pulled from the depths of her soul. Clutching the photo of her daughter she had carried every day of the trial, Karen crumpled in her chair, her face a mask of disbelief. I didn't see her. She whispered again, but now it sounded different. Less like a defense, more like a confession. She no longer believed herself. The bailiff moved to escort her away. Reporters scribbled furiously. Neighbors embraced, wept, or simply sat in stunned silence. And in that courtroom, heavy with grief and judgment, Maya's presence lingered. Not in her empty chair, not in the photographs, but in the unshakable truth that justice, however belated, had spoken for her.